Chapter 2. The Feast. Sasky crouched in the path with his back against the bohangan and his belt knife raised to deal with any wild beast that might rush upon him. The sounds had stopped. The jungle was quiet, but his terror remained. His mouth felt dry and bitter. His hands shook, and the strength of his body seemed to melt away. Then words came to him, not words that could be heard with the ear, but words that hung close in the air and compelled his heart to listen. They were the words Raja had spoken that morning by the pool below Singing Water. He can always help you in any kind of trouble. Talk to him. He will hear you. The boy felt a great sob pressing up in his throat. His mind rejected the thought of Raja's God, but his heart in its terror was like a small, pitiful creature running to any refuge that opened before it. Without wanting to, without meaning to, his thoughts flew to the God of heaven. A light flashed in the path that led to his village. That light and the crashing and grunting in the brush showed him that his companion in the darkness was a wild pig. Frightened by the light, the pig scrambled off into the jungle. A voice called to him through the night. It was his father, Paco. He held a burning torch in his hand. "Sasky! Sasky!" The light came closer. "Are you there?" His father must have heard the noise of the wild pig. The boy was too surprised and relieved to answer at once. His father had almost reached the spot where he stood with his back against the tree when he spoke. "I am here, Father." He felt weak all over, and the cold sweat stood out on his face and shoulders. "Kuning said you would come today, and I began to worry about you. I was afraid you might have been delayed and be in some danger. It is good you have come." Then his father lifted the heavy bohangan, unfastened it from Sasky's arms and head. He placed it on his own back and carried it to the house in Broken Light, the house where Sasky had been born. Paco had prepared rice, and now he set the food before his son. "Eat, and then rest a while before you go to bathe." Sasky felt so tired that the food had little attraction for him. He only picked at it. His father sat beside him and asked him many questions about the new teaching that had come to Singing Water. "Is it true that the medicine of Rajan cures sick people?" "Oh, maybe," the boy answered. "But people are also helped by Kuning's medicine." "Tell me," the older man's eyes glistened in the light from the coconut oil lamp. "Tell me, how does your Uncle Sobat, my brother, feel about this new witchcraft?" "Uncle Sobat and Aunt Gar go every night to hear the words and sing the songs. So does everyone else in the village." Sasky left off eating and sat looking at his father. Paco was a thick-set man with powerful arms and legs. His face appeared heavy. Only his keen eyes gave life to it. He was known to be a quiet man who loved the jungle. He was a great hunter. Once he lost his way along the mountains and lived for several days on the roots of the wild jungle fern called Paco. Thus he got his name, and it has stuck with him through the years. "You are tired from the hard climb up the mountain," Paco said to his son. "Go and bathe. Then you must sleep. There will be time to talk tomorrow." Sasky took a clean pair of short dark trousers from the bohangan and went to the spring to bathe. The spring discharged a fine stream of water right in the middle of the village. The people had guided it down the mountain in a series of giant bamboo lengths laid on a rude trestle. They had placed the flat stones where the bamboo spouted the clear water so the earth could not be washed away. Saskia remembered the pool at Singing Water. Would he ever dip in that pool again? Would he always have to bathe like this, standing on a stone with a stream of water splashing over him? The boy felt better after his bath. He went to his sleeping mat. In spite of his weariness, he found it very hard to go to sleep. His mind went back to the terrible moment on the path. He recalled how, for just an instant, his heart had gone out to the God of heaven. He hadn't wanted to. He hated the God of heaven. Yet, in his fright, he had almost turned to him. Almost. Perhaps in his heart he really had called on God, the God of Rajan. Then came the light in the path and his father's voice calling his name. Could the God of heaven answer so quickly? He felt prickly all over and his heart beat fast. He twisted and turned on his mat. When he did fall asleep, he awakened often, and the tune of a song rippled through his mind, a song Rajan had taught the people of Singing Water. When the morning sunshine streamed through the tiny window above his mat, Saskia awakened and sat up. For a moment he couldn't think where he was. Then he remembered. He was home in his own village, safe in his father's house. "Peaceful morning to you," Kunin called in front of the door. "Peaceful morning," Paku answered, opening the door wide. "I have a good thought," the witch doctor said, coming in and settling himself on a mat. "Our son has come home to stay. Shouldn't we have a little celebration in honor of his return? You have some fine rice wine, and I have some. We could make a little feast and have some dancing and music. Then the boy will feel and know that we are glad that he is home to stay." "That's a fine idea," Saski's father looked at him. "You would like that, wouldn't you?" The boy nodded his head. "I have been looking forward to our drinking parties and dancing," he said. "There is nothing like that in the village of Singing Water any more." Kunin shook his head in grave sadness. "That's too bad. That abominable teaching spoils everything." He stomped his foot and shook and clenched his fist. "We will keep all the old customs lively here in this village. Perhaps some of the people from Singing Water will move up here and get away from that God teacher and his witchcraft." Kunin was a small man, old and tired, out like a green fruit that had lain for a long time in the sun. His hair was thin and a little gray. His nose stood up from his face more than is usual in the Dotson people, and it was sharper than ordinary. His yellow teeth were loose, and they chattered when he talked fast or became excited. He was a restless fellow. His hands were always working, twisting together, waving about, or gesturing furiously while he talked. Kunin talked a lot. He knew everybody's business, and nothing went on in the village without his supervision. There was a particular glittering quality about his eyes. They were not bright or clear. Years of drinking had taken away any freshness of expression that might have been there, but there was something sharp and sly about them. Saskia looked straight into Kunin's eyes as he spoke. "Do you think if you went to the village of Singing Water, you could persuade Uncle Sobat and Aunt Gar to stop going to that teacher's house?" "I have already talked to Sobat." The old man waved his hands and shook them back and forth in a gesture of hopelessness. "I talked to him, and he answered me that he will hear all about this new teaching first, and then he will decide." At sundown 2 days later, the drums were brought out and placed on the grassy slope near the bathing place in the center of the village. The women and children squatted in a circle about the spot. Rice wine was passed around. The drinking began. Even the musicians stopped frequently to gulp from the coconut shells full of liquor. Then the beating of the drums and tom-toms took on a more fierce and faster rhythm. A young man swayed to the center of the circle and began a wild dance. As he wagged and twisted his almost naked body, he waved his hands in meaningful gestures and chanted an old tribal song. Another man joined him, and the two entertained the company for several minutes. Then two women took up the dance and the chant. The moon came out full and round and looked down on the scene through the great jungle trees and the coconut palms. Sasky sat in the circle watching. The moonlight seemed almost as bright as day. A woman brought him a big coconut cup brimming with rice wine. He sipped a little. For more than 2 months he had not tasted any wine. Even before that, Uncle Sobat had never let him have more than a sip or two. Uncle Sobat said it was not good for young people to drink wine. Now the people were watching him. They knew this feast was in his honor. They expected him to enjoy himself. He lifted the cup and drained it, and then sat back feeling that at last he was a man. Here he was in his own village with a feast to honor him, and he could toss down a coconut shell full of wine as well as the best of any of them. Then he began to have an uneasy feeling in his middle. His stomach rejected the sudden drenching with liquor. He got up and ran to the back of his father's house. He was violently sick. He lay on the ground, rolling about in distress until he felt better. Then he went back to his place among the watching people. The sound of the drums and the tom-toms was terrific. His head felt ready to burst. Surely they could hear this noise all the way down the mountain. They could certainly hear it in Singing Water. It was only 6 miles away. Then he remembered. No, they could not. They were all gathered in Rajan's house singing. The sound of the singing would drown out all other noises. The boy was startled by his own thoughts. Where was the gladness of this feast? The gladness he remembered. Where was the happiness of this group of villagers gathered under the stars and the coconut palms, drinking and making this frightful racket? This was not as he had expected, not like his memories. Something must be wrong. As the night advanced, the drinking and dancing were made more hideous by the shouts of drunken people. Early in the morning, the dancing stopped. Most of the men were drunk. Among them, the chief of Broken Light and his son, Jerab, a tall lad of 16 years. They wobbled to their feet and began to argue in loud voices. It was impossible to understand what the quarrel was about. They began to scream at each other and strike out with their fists. Finally, they knocked together in a fierce struggle. The young man, Jerab, was slender and quick. He was a fine-looking fellow. The whole village knew that he would someday be chief. The old chief was stocky and heavy with great strength. The two wrestlers dragged and pushed and clawed each other. They were coming closer to the spot where Sasky sat. He stood up and backed up a few steps. Then, with a burst of fury, the old chief threw his son to the ground in sudden victory. The young man went down with a terrible scream. Koonin the witch doctor hurried to him. One leg stuck out from his side at a grotesque angle. It seemed to be unjointed at the hip. The young man was in frightful pain. He screamed in agony for several minutes, in spite of his mother, who tried to speak comforting words to him. Then he lapsed into unconsciousness. After all, he was very drunk. The old chief sank down exhausted to the ground. It was plain that he had no idea of what had happened. He, too, was filled with rice wine. He began to snore.